The stepmother left her stepdaughter stranded on the roadside, but days later, she was stunned by what happened next. The dimly lit hallway of the house was silent except for the faint creak of the floorboards as 7-year-old Emily wandered, clutching her teddy bear. With her curly brown hair framing her innocent green eyes, she was searching for the missing toy she had left on the living room couch. Her tiny steps echoed softly, but as she got closer, muffled voices and soft laughter seeped through the door. Her stepmother, Vivian, was speaking to someone in a low, almost conspiratorial tone. Emily froze, her small heart pounding in her chest. Why is she laughing like that when Dad isn't home? Who is she talking to? Her curiosity outweighed her fear, and Emily tiptoed closer, peeking through the small gap in the door. Vivian, a striking woman with perfectly styled auburn hair and a sharp, polished demeanor, stood confidently with a man Emily didn't recognize. His slicked-back black hair and piercing eyes gave him an intimidating aura. Their conversation was hushed, but unmistakable in its seriousness. "I've already convinced David," Vivian said, her voice calm yet calculating. "The money will soon be ours. He trusts me completely." Poor man has no idea. Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She clutched her teddy bear tighter as panic began to set in. They're talking about Dad's money. But why? Is she lying to him? The man chuckled, a cold, sharp sound that made Emily shiver. "And what about the girl?" he asked. "She could ruin everything." Vivian waved dismissively. "Emily, she's just a child. Even if she found out, who would believe her? She's harmless." Emily felt a chill creep down her spine. The casual cruelty in Vivian's voice pierced her like a knife. The woman she called her stepmother wasn't who she pretended to be. "They're talking about me. They want to get rid of me. I have to tell Dad before it's too late," Emily thought, her small frame trembling with fear. But just as she turned to sneak away, her foot bumped into a side table. The vase on top wobbled precariously before landing on the floor with a deafening crash. The voices in the room stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" Vivian's sharp voice sliced through the air like a dagger. Emily's heart raced, her legs frozen in place. "Emily." Emily's voice softened unnaturally below, in urgent and grievous surmises, controlled by some mysterious agency that must be concealed, compelled, controlled. It's burning hot, beautiful, and angry. Emily's instincts screamed for her to run. She bolted down the hallway, her bare feet padding against the wooden floor as Vivian's footsteps thundered behind her. "Emily, stop right now!" Vivian shouted, her voice echoing through the house. Emily didn't stop. Tears blurred her vision, but she pressed on, clutching her teddy bear as if it could shield her from the storm chasing her. Her little legs carried her to the front door, but just as she reached it, a strong hand gripped her shoulder. Vivian turned her around, her face a mask of false calm. "Emily, what's the rush? You're acting very silly," she said, her voice laced with fake concern. Emily's courage flared, her small voice trembling but defiant. "I heard you. You're lying to Dad. I'm going to tell him everything." Emily's stomach twisted with fear as Vivian's tone shifted to cold determination. The warm, loving facade her stepmother wore in front of her father had shattered, revealing the cruel and calculating woman underneath. "I have to escape," Emily thought desperately. But how? Vivian's hand moved to her wrist, dragging her toward the front door. "You're coming with me, Emily," she said, her voice as sharp as the icy wind outside. "Let me go," Emily cried, struggling against her stepmother's grip. But Vivian was stronger, her polished nails digging into Emily's small arm as she yanked her outside. The night air was frigid, and the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the driveway. Vivian opened the car door and pushed Emily inside. "Get in." "Now," Emily hesitated, her mind racing for a way to escape. But Vivian's cold, hard stare told her resistance would be futile. For now. As the car roared to life, Emily's thoughts swirled in a mix of fear and determination. "I can't let her win. I have to find a way to warn Dad. No matter what, I won't let her hurt us." The car sped down the dark, deserted road. Emily sat in the back seat, her small hands clutching her teddy bear as she stared out at the endless blackness beyond the window. Vivian's silence was as chilling as the night air. Her once warm demeanor had disappeared, replaced by an icy resolve that made Emily's heart pound. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Vivian didn't look back, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere we can think without interruptions," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Emily's unease grew. The headlights carved shallow beams through the empty road ahead, illuminating little more than the occasional tree. The quiet hum of the engine only heightened the tension. "I can't let her do this. I have to find a way out," Emily thought, her mind racing. After what felt like hours, the car slowed and came to a stop on a desolate stretch of road surrounded by dense woods. The faint chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind filled the silence. Vivian turned off the engine and stepped out, her heels crunching on the gravel. "Get out," she ordered, opening the back door. Emily froze. "No! Take me home," she shouted, clutching her teddy bear as tears began to stream down her face. Vivian's face darkened. "Enough, Emily. I don't have time for your games. Get out of the car, now." Her voice was sharp and commanding. Emily's small frame trembled, but she didn't move. Vivian reached in, grabbing her arm and pulling her out with surprising force. The cold night air bit into Emily's skin as she stumbled onto the gravel. "You'll stay here," Vivian said, her tone calm but menacing. "And don't think about trying to go anywhere. It's miles to the nearest house, and you wouldn't want to get lost in the dark, would you?" Emily's tears flowed freely now, her sobs muffled by the oppressive silence of the night. "Please, don't leave me here," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'll stay quiet. I won't tell Dad. Just take me home." But Vivian's expression remained unmoved. "You've caused enough trouble, Emily. Maybe this will teach you to stay out of things that don't concern you." Without another word, Vivian got back into the car and slammed the door. The engine roared to life and the taillights faded into the distance, leaving Emily alone in the cold and dark. For a moment, Emily stood frozen, her small figure illuminated only by the pale light of the moon. The reality of her situation began to sink in, and fear gripped her chest like a vice. She really left me. I'm alone. What do I do now? Emily wiped her tears and took a deep breath. I have to be strong. I can't just stay here. I have to find my way back to Dad. She clutched her teddy bear tightly and began walking down the road, her bare feet crunching against the gravel with every hesitant step. As Emily walked, the sound of an approaching car broke the silence. Her heart leapt with hope, but as the vehicle drew closer, the glare of the headlights revealed a man stepping out, a face she recognized from earlier in the day. It was the man Vivian had been speaking to. "Hey there, little one," the man said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "What are you doing out here, all alone?" Emily's instincts screamed at her to run. She took a step back, clutching her teddy bear like a shield. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice shaking. The man chuckled, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Oh, don't be scared. I just want to help you get back home." But Emily could see through his act. He's lying. He's with her. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the rough road as she pushed her small body to move faster. "Hey, come back here," the man shouted, his footsteps echoing behind her. Emily's lungs burned, and her legs felt like they would give out at any moment. But she kept running, her mind focused on one thing: escape. Up ahead, she spotted a small dirt path leading into the woods. Without hesitation, she veered off the road and into the trees, hoping the darkness would hide her. The woods were silent except for the rustling of leaves under Emily's feet and the occasional crack of a branch. The man's shouts grew fainter, but Emily didn't stop. She weaved through the trees, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Finally, she reached a small clearing and collapsed onto the ground, clutching her teddy bear as if it could protect her. The cold seeped through her thin clothes, but she didn't care. For now, she was hidden. "I have to find help. I can't stay here forever. Someone has to be looking for me, right?" Emily thought, her mind racing with fear and exhaustion. Just as despair began to take hold, she heard the faint sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Her heart stopped. She curled into a tight ball, hoping the shadows would conceal her. But then a soft voice broke the silence. "Hello? Is someone there?" Emily's eyes widened. This voice wasn't like the man's. It was calm, kind, and full of concern. "Don't be scared, I'm here to help," the voice said again. Peeking through the bushes, Emily saw a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a flashlight in hand. Her heart wavered between fear and hope. "Can I trust her?" The woman took another step closer, her gaze scanning the clearing. "It's okay, sweetheart. My name is Margaret. You're safe now. Let me help you." Something about Margaret's gentle tone made Emily's fear begin to melt away. She slowly stood, clutching her teddy bear tightly as she stepped out of the shadows. Margaret gasped softly when she saw the small, trembling figure. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, kneeling to Emily's level. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Emily hesitated, but the warmth in Margaret's eyes gave her the courage to speak. "My stepmother. She left me here," she whispered. "I need to get back to my dad." Margaret's expression hardened, but her voice remained gentle. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll help you. Let's get you somewhere safe first." For the first time that night, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I'll make it home after all. The warmth of Margaret's car felt like a safe cocoon compared to the cold, dark woods. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her hands wrapped around the steaming cup of hot cocoa Margaret had given her. The faint hum of the car engine was oddly soothing, but the fear still lingered in her chest. Margaret glanced at Emily as they drove down the quiet road. The girl's face, illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard, was pale and weary. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Margaret said gently. "You're safe now. We'll figure this out together." Emily looked up at her, clutching her teddy bear. "She said no one would believe me," she murmured, her voice trembling, "that I was just a kid and no one would care." Margaret's heart clenched. "Listen to me, Emily," she said, her tone firm yet comforting. "What she did was wrong, and I believe you. We're going to make sure your dad knows the truth." Emily nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope, but the memory of her stepmother's cold words and the man's menacing face lingered like shadows in her mind. As they approached a small roadside diner, Margaret slowed the car. "We need to stop for a bit. You look like you could use something to eat, and I need to call the police," she explained. Emily hesitated but nodded. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the thought of food was mentioned. Her stomach growled softly, betraying her. Inside the diner, the warm smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon greeted them. Margaret guided Emily to a booth near the back, away from the other patrons. The waitress, a friendly woman with a kind smile, approached them. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her gaze softening when she noticed Emily. "A grilled cheese and a hot chocolate for her, please," Margaret said, "and a coffee for me." As the waitress walked away, Margaret leaned in closer to Emily. "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just eat something and we'll figure out the next steps," she said. Emily nodded, her fingers tracing the seams of her teddy bear. "What if she finds me again?" she whispered. Margaret placed a reassuring hand over Emily's. "She won't. I won't let her. And once we talk to the police, they'll make sure she can't hurt you anymore." The food arrived and Emily ate in small, hesitant bites, the warmth of the grilled cheese sandwich easing the tension in her body. Margaret stepped away to call the police, her voice low but urgent as she explained the situation. Emily looked out the window, her thoughts a whirlpool of fear and hope. What if they don't believe me? What if she convinces Dad I'm lying? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the diner door opening. A man entered, his dark eyes scanning the room. Emily's heart dropped when she recognized him. It was the same man who had been with Vivian. Panic surged through her veins. She ducked her head, trying to make herself as small as possible. "He found me. What do I do?" Margaret returned to the table, her face tense. "The police are on their way," she said, but stopped when she saw the terror in Emily's eyes. "What's wrong?" Emily leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "It's him, the man from before. He's here." Margaret's eyes darted toward the man, her jaw tightening. She didn't hesitate. "Stay here," she said firmly. "I'll handle this." Margaret approached the man, her every step radiating calm determination. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady but with an edge of protectiveness. The man's smile was thin and unconvincing. "I'm just looking for my niece. She ran off, and I've been worried sick about her." Margaret crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "Your niece, you say? Funny, because the girl you're describing told me her stepmother left her on the side of the road. Care to explain that?" The man's facade cracked for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "It's a misunderstanding," he said. "I just want to take her home." Margaret didn't back down. "The police are on their way," she said firmly. "If you're telling the truth, you can explain it to them. Until then, you're not going anywhere near her." Meanwhile, Emily's heart raced as she watched the confrontation from the booth. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like lead. Then she noticed the back door of the diner, slightly ajar. "If I can just get outside, maybe I can find somewhere to hide until the police come." She slipped out of the booth and made her way toward the door, clutching her teddy bear tightly. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside, her bare feet crunching on the gravel. She didn't get far before she heard hurried footsteps behind her. She turned to see the man following her, his expression dark and menacing. "You thought you could get away?" he sneered, reaching for her. Emily screamed, her voice piercing the still night. She stumbled backward, tripping over a loose rock and falling to the ground. Before the man could grab her, the sound of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter by the second. The man froze, his eyes darting around in panic. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness just as the police cars screeched to a stop. Margaret rushed out of the diner, her heart pounding with relief when she saw Emily sitting on the ground, trembling but unharmed. She wrapped the girl in a protective embrace. "You're safe now," Margaret whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Emily clung to her, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she sobbed. The officers approached, their presence a reassuring wall of protection. Margaret explained everything, and Emily told her story through broken words and tears. The officers listened carefully, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. "We'll make sure she's safe," one of them promised. "And we'll find the man who did this." As they drove away, Emily leaned against Margaret, exhaustion finally overtaking her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a glimmer of hope. Emily woke in the back of a police car, the rhythmic hum of the engine blending with the distant murmur of voices on the radio. Margaret sat beside her, her presence like a comforting shield. Emily's small hand still clutched her teddy bear, though now it bore the marks of her tears and dirt from the ordeal. "You're okay," Margaret said softly, noticing Emily stir. "The officers are taking us somewhere safe. They'll help find your dad." Emily nodded, though her mind was filled with dread. Would he believe her? Would Vivian convince him that it was all a lie? The car pulled into a small police station, its brick walls bathed in the amber glow of streetlights. Inside, the officers escorted Emily and Margaret to a warm room furnished with comfortable chairs. A kind-looking female officer knelt beside Emily, her smile gentle. "My name is Officer Lila," she said. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me more about what happened?" Emily hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Margaret. The older woman nodded encouragingly, and Emily began to recount everything. The overheard conversation, Vivian's cold words, the man chasing her, and being abandoned on the roadside. The officer listened intently, taking notes. When Emily finished, Officer Lila leaned closer. "You've been so brave, Emily. I know this is hard, but we'll do everything we can to make sure you're safe." While Emily rested in a nearby room, Margaret and the officers worked on the next steps. "We need to find her father," Margaret said firmly. "He has to hear the truth before Vivian can twist the story." The officers nodded. "We've already contacted him. He's on his way," Officer Lila said. "We're also issuing a warrant for Vivian and the man Emily described." Margaret felt a wave of relief, but it was tinged with worry. What if Benjamin, Emily's father, refused to believe the truth? A couple of hours later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the station. Benjamin burst into the room, his face pale with worry. His eyes scanned the space until they landed on Emily, who was sitting on a chair, clutching her teddy bear. "Emily!" he exclaimed, rushing to her side. He knelt in front of her, his hands trembling as he cupped her face. "Are you okay? What happened?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, Vivian, she left me on the road. She was going to take your money and she didn't want me to tell you." Benjamin frowned, confusion and disbelief clouding his expression. "What are you talking about, sweetheart? Vivian wouldn't." "She did," Emily cried, her voice rising with desperation. "She said no one would believe me. She called me a problem." Benjamin looked at Margaret, his expression conflicted. "What is this about?" he demanded. Margaret stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I found Emily on the roadside, terrified and alone. She told me everything about Vivian's plan to take your money and how she left Emily to fend for herself. I know it's hard to believe, but your daughter is telling the truth." Before Benjamin could respond, Officer Lila entered the room holding a file. "Mr. Carter, we've done some preliminary investigations. We found footage from a security camera near the road where Emily was abandoned. It corroborates her story." She placed photographs on the table, images of Vivian's car stopping on the roadside and Emily being left behind. Benjamin's face turned pale as he stared at the evidence. This can't be real," he murmured. "Vivian wouldn't..." "She did," Emily said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. "She doesn't love us, Dad. She just wants your money." The weight of realization settled over Benjamin like a storm cloud. His hands clenched into fists as anger and betrayal surged within him. I trusted her," he whispered. "I brought her into our home, into our lives." He turned to Emily, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have seen this. I should have protected you." Emily threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I just wanted you to know the truth," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. The officers explained their next steps, arresting Vivian and her accomplice, ensuring Emily's safety, and initiating legal proceedings. Benjamin, though shaken, was determined to do whatever it took to make things right. "I'll make sure she pays for what she's done," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "No one hurts my daughter and gets away with it." Margaret placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "And you have people here who will help you every step of the way." As the night wore on, Emily fell asleep in her father's arms, her exhaustion finally overtaking her. Benjamin held her tightly, vowing to rebuild the trust and security that Vivian had shattered. Margaret watched the scene with a mix of relief and sadness. She had only known Emily for a short time, but the bond they had formed felt unbreakable. "She's lucky to have you," Margaret said softly. "No," Benjamin replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm lucky to have her, and I won't take that for granted ever again." The morning light streamed through the windows of Benjamin's home, casting a soft golden hue over the living room. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her teddy bear in one hand and a coloring book in the other. Her focus on the bright colors seemed to reflect her mood, a cautious return to normalcy. Benjamin entered the room carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa. "I thought we could use something sweet this morning," he said, placing the tray on the coffee table. His smile was warm, but there was still a trace of guilt in his eyes. Emily looked up, her green eyes studying her father carefully. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. She hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you believe me now." Benjamin knelt beside her, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have believed you from the start, Emily. I'm so sorry I didn't see the truth sooner. But I promise you, from now on, I'll always listen to you." Emily nodded, her small smile lighting up her face. "That's all I wanted, Dad, for us to be a team." Later that day, Margaret arrived at the house, her presence like a steadying anchor. She had been a constant source of support since the events of the previous night, and her bond with Emily had only grown stronger. "Good morning, you two," Margaret greeted, stepping inside with a bag of groceries. "I thought I'd bring over some treats and maybe help tidy up a bit." Emily rushed to greet her, wrapping her arms around Margaret's waist. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. Margaret knelt to Emily's level. "I'm glad to be here, sweetheart. You're part of my family now, too." Benjamin watched the exchange with gratitude. "Margaret, I don't think we can ever thank you enough for what you've done. You were there for Emily when I wasn't. That means everything to me." Margaret waved off his words with a smile. "You're a good father, Benjamin. You've shown that now. And Emily's an incredible little girl. It's been an honor to be a part of her journey." In the weeks that followed, Vivian and her accomplice were brought to trial. The evidence, including the security footage and her accomplice's confession, painted a damning picture. The court sentenced both to significant prison terms for child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy. For Benjamin, the trial was a sobering experience, but it also brought closure. He realized how much he had overlooked in his desire to rebuild his life after his wife's death. "I was so focused on moving forward that I didn't see what was right in front of me," he admitted to Margaret after the verdict. "But now you do," Margaret replied, "and that's what matters. You're building a better future for Emily." As the days turned into months, Benjamin and Emily worked to heal their bond. They spent their weekends exploring parks, baking cookies, and watching Emily's favorite cartoons. Margaret often joined them, her role evolving from rescuer to honorary family member. One afternoon, as they walked through a nearby park, Benjamin turned to Emily. "You know, I've been thinking about taking some time off work. Maybe we could go on a little adventure, just the two of us." Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? Like a trip?" "Exactly," Benjamin said with a smile. "Anywhere you want to go." Emily thought for a moment, her expression serious. "I want to go to the mountains. Mom always talked about how much she loved the mountains." Benjamin's smile softened. Then the mountains it is. We'll make some new memories together. On the day of their trip, Margaret came to see them off, bringing a packed picnic basket for their journey. "Make sure you take lots of pictures," she said, hugging Emily tightly. "And don't forget to bring me back a story." "We will," Emily promised. "And I'll draw you a picture of the mountains, too." The trip marked a turning point for both father and daughter. Sitting by a campfire, under a sky full of stars, Benjamin listened as Emily shared her dreams and fears. He realized how resilient and wise she had become, despite her young age. "You're the bravest person I know, Emily," he said, his voice filled with pride. "And I'm so lucky to be your dad." Emily leaned against him, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. "I'm lucky too, Dad. I feel safe again." Back at home, Margaret greeted them with open arms. They shared stories of the trip, complete with photos of Emily proudly standing on a mountaintop. As they laughed and reminisced, the room was filled with a warmth that hadn't been there for years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer defined them. Together, they embraced the future with open hearts, knowing that love, trust, and resilience would guide them through whatever lay ahead.